An Irrational Hatred of Luton, a West Ham fan's story by Robert Banks. Forward by Tony Cottee. Chapter 45. You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. Arsenal 2, West Ham United 1, 4th of February 1989. I had to go to a ball. I didn't want to go to a ball, but if I wanted to keep Karen within range, I had to go to a ball. It was a college do, something I didn't really want to attend, knowing it would be full of hoorays in their dinner jackets, dicky bows and satin ball gowns. I shook the moths out of my dinner jacket and hung it on the bedroom door handle. I didn't want to go. I arranged to meet Karen at Charing Cross Station after our game against Arsenal. The game itself had been the usual type of performance, the only surprising thing being we didn't lose by more goals. Julian Dix scored his first ever goal for West Ham, which makes the memory sweeter, but at the time it was just another defeat. Karen was still living with this Dave character, who by all accounts was a mean and nasty monster. I met him some time later, and a nicer guy you couldn't wish to meet. It made me wonder what picture she would paint of me to other people. The ball was actually a charity gig, a dinner dance, which meant having to sit down and wade our way through a 5-course meal before attempting to achieve a double hernia on the dance floor. We sat on a table of 8, joined by John Morley, son of Eric, of Miss World fame, but no relation to Trevor. He said he had been at the game also that afternoon. "Oh, really?" I said. I knew he was an Arsenal man, so I asked him if he was on the North Bank. "Oh no," he said, as if to imply, "What a vulgar thought." He looked at the meat on the end of his fork, anything rather than stare at a common West Ham supporter in the eye. "I was in a box." Morley had already rubbed me up the wrong way earlier in the evening, and I was beginning to wish I could put him in a box. "Well, at least we scored the best goal," I added, thinking I would have the last word. "Did you, old chap?" he sneered. "Didn't see, had to leave early to get the Daimler out of the car park." Bastard, he'd got me there. At least Karen was behaving herself and acting as though she wanted to be with me. She wore the most amazing low-cut green velvet dress, which left little to the imagination. She'd been winding me up by getting changed in front of me earlier in the evening. By now she knew how I felt about her. It was futile for me to make any attempt to hide it, or pretend that I needed advice on how to win over Roseanne. Looking back, I can't believe how stupid we both were. Given the choice, I would rather not have played Luton in the semi-finals of the Littlewoods Cup on a Sunday afternoon in front of live TV cameras. Staintooth helped me look on the bright side. "At least we're in the semi-finals," he chirped. "Lots of other teams would like to be in our shoes." By the end of the day, we were both wishing we'd slipped quietly out of the competition to Aston Villa in the previous round. Luton demolished us 3-0, humiliated us in front of all our friends. Mick Harford scored the first after McKnight went walkabout again. Roy Wegerle slipped the second through a gaping hole under McKnight's body, and Julian Dix committed a blatant foul in the penalty area to allow Danny Wilson to make it 3 from the spot. The prospect of a Wembley final to make up for the disappointment of the league form melted away within the space of around 20 minutes. There was no chance of pulling back a 3-0 scoreline, not at Luton on their plastic pitch. The draw had beaten us. Had we played the away leg first, the second leg would have been under the lights on a Wednesday night, without the intrusion of live TV cameras. We could have coped with that. Instead, we travelled to Charlton for the 5th round of the FA Cup, with our tails firmly between our legs. At least John Lyall saw sense and dropped McKnight, bringing back Phil Parks, the goalkeeper that McKnight had been purchased to replace. It was the second season in a row we'd played Charlton in the Cup, and the third in the last 4. On both previous occasions we'd been successful, and that trend continued, despite Mark Ward being sent off. Stuart Slater scored the first senior goal of his career, and it seemed that the disappointment of missing Wembley through the Littlewoods Cup had given way to the optimism of a Wembley visit in the FA Cup. We were drawn at home in the quarter-finals, which was all that could be asked, to Norwich City. It wasn't going to be an evening game, but we anticipated victory nevertheless. It was around this time that I bought my first fanzine, Fortune's Always Hiding. I still have all the copies of that fanzine, up on the shelves along with the programmes. The wit and the humour in those magazines was like a breath of fresh air. At last someone had the guts to put in writing that we were crap. Not just that, they said it in an articulate and funny way, with excellent cartoons and strips as well. There were other fanzines available, such as Never Mind the Bowling, On the Terraces, and Overland and Sea, but to my mind, Fortunes was the best one. If you had bought all the fanzines, it would have cost you an arm and a leg every Saturday, so I made my choice and stuck with it. After drawing 0-0 at home to QPR, we lost the second leg of the semi-final, as predicted. This time it was only 2-0, but made the aggregate 5-0 and had the statisticians reaching for the form books and calculators to find it was the heaviest margin of defeat in a League Cup semi-final since 1965. Good old West Ham, always breaking records. I was still trying the occasional trick to try and arouse some kind of reaction from Karen. When we played Coventry City on March the 11th, I told her a wicked lie. I told her I'd gone to see Diana and that we'd spend the entire afternoon in bed making love a total of 7 times before her husband came home and I had to slip out of the window. It's a good job Karen didn't know Diana lived in a 5th floor flat, or my story might have fallen flat a good deal earlier than it did. In fact, nothing so exciting took place. I sat in the West Stand with Staintooth watching us fight out a dull 1-1 draw. Coventry took the lead through a dubious penalty. Ince equalised, then the referee played about 10 minutes of injury time, during which we created enough chances to have won the game handsomely. But when relegation is a certainty, that kind of thing just never happens. When you're down, you're down. Chapter 46. Too Many People. West Ham United 1, Southampton 2, 15th of April, 1989. Karen was annoying me intensely. She just would not come across. We went out more frequently than the average courting couple and would talk long into the night about matters of global as well as personal importance. Still, it seemed, she wasn't interested in the contents of my boxer shorts. After one particularly harrowing evening, she gave me a full description of her deprived childhood. This included the bit about her father walking out when she was a baby, and her stepfather treating her like shit, having an abortion at the age of 17, and generally having a rough time. I couldn't compete with that, and was made to feel guilty about the fact that I had such nice parents and a trouble-free childhood. As I was leaving, I handed her a tape that I'd made of 2 songs I'd written for her. To this day they remain my 2 favourites, although not necessarily the best that I've written. They were certainly the most expressive and did the trick. There were a couple of slushy numbers called Now That I've Hurt You and I Don't Know Why I Love You. When I got home, she rang me in a flood of tears and said, "I didn't know you felt that way." Lying cow. She knew damn well she just wanted to hear me spell it out. We drew our cup quarter-final with Norwich 0-0. Again, it's not a game that sticks in the memory particularly well. As far as I can remember, we didn't play well and were lucky to get a replay. Staintooth decided to go to the replay and I grabbed a lift, as he had now got rid of the embarrassing Allegro and now had an embarrassing Montego. It was less embarrassing than the Allegro, but only just. We got caught up in roadworks and didn't get to the ground until 5 minutes into the game. We bumped into Close and one of his mates inside the ground and watched the game from the corner flag together. Rumour abounded that John Lyall was about to swoop for Frank McAvenny again in a $1.25 million record signing deal. I was sceptical. John Lyall hadn't swooped for ages. It turned out to be his last throw of the dice. There was an expectant buzz among the West Ham fans, chants of "We've got our Frankie back" to the tune of Those Were the Days. Appropriate, really. The mood of optimism was shattered when Malcolm Allen scored twice in the first half and we were left chasing the game. Paul Ince managed to pull one back in the second half, but as it went in I remember saying to Staintooth that it would probably end 3-1 to Norwich, and that proved to be correct, Dale Gordon putting the tie beyond doubt and booking a semi-final date with Everton. Because of the replay with Norwich, we had to postpone our league match with Southampton. As we were due to play Nottingham Forest on Cup semi-final day, and they were involved in the other semi against Liverpool, we were able to rearrange the fixture for a Saturday afternoon, with no extra backlog occurring. It was strange that despite being in both cup competitions until the latter stages, we didn't suffer the fixture pile-ups that had occurred in previous seasons. In spite of that, we were still playing crap. A brief respite from the dross came the following Saturday as we played Aston Villa at Villa Park and Paul Ince scored the goal of the century, running almost the full length of the pitch to fire the ball into the top corner. It was even better than Liam Brady's effort against Derby, but curiously only made second place in ITV's Goal of the Season competition. Had he scored the goal for Manchester United, it would no doubt have won first, second and third place. Maybe I'm just bitter and twisted. Frank McAvenny made his second West Ham debut and things appeared to be looking up. Maybe Frank would be our saviour. Later that week, Karen and I went on our first date as an item. She'd finally discarded Dopey Dave and was all mine to do as I wished. I tried to make it look as though I hadn't planned anything when I brought her home, put Rachmaninoff on the CD player and miraculously found a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses in the fridge. I always keep a couple of champagne glasses in the fridge, I told her. You never know who might drop in, do you? I thought I was in heaven. Perhaps I was, I thought to myself, as I awoke in the morning, leaving Karen to sleep off the nocturnal activity, and I went to do my paper round. I had Paul McCartney's Ram album on my Walkman, which again was rather appropriate. The opening track, Too Many People, put an extra skip in my step as I went on my round, came home, made tea and toast. I was in love big time. I gave her a choice for the bank holiday Monday. Either we could go out for the day somewhere really boring like Chessington World of Adventures or the coast, or we could spend a really exciting afternoon watching West Ham beat Norwich at Upton Park. As we were still in the early stages of our physical relationship, she was as eager to please me as I was to please her, and she chose the trip to West Ham with only 15 minutes of hesitation. Staintooth and Close came with us, which on reflection might not have been such a good move, but my confidence of getting a result turned out to be misplaced. Norwich beat us for the 3rd time in 4 games, to leave us back on the bottom, 4 points behind Newcastle, but with 2 games in hand, and 10 points behind Charlton and Southampton, but with 4 games in hand. Games in hand are all very well, but we had a total of 19 points from 25 games, a dismal record by anyone's standards. Only 4 wins in the league all season. We would be lucky on paper to win one of our games in hand, let alone the 4 required. The next game was away at Tottenham. Karen went back up to Wrexham to see her parents, and I was left to my own devices. I remember the West Ham crowd baiting Paul Stewart, the Tottenham striker, who at the time was the most expensive player in the country never to have played for his country. I knew the chance of what a waste of money would probably be rammed back down our throats, and I was right. Stewart won a second-half penalty and scored one himself, to add to a first-half goal from Naeem to see us off 3-0. We then faced 3 home games in a row in the space of a week to try and pick up some ground. 9 points would have helped out a great deal, but for a team that had won only once at home all season, 3 might have been the most we could hope for. We got 1 against Derby County, the team we'd walloped 5-0 in the Littlewoods Cup and beaten on their own ground in the league. They put up stubborn resistance, and Leroy Rosinia scored our goal in a naff 1-1 draw. Middlesbrough came down on the Tuesday night. Everything was going well. We were 1-0 up through a Kevin Keane goal, when Bernie Slaven scored twice to puncture our little escape balloon. Middlesbrough were in deep trouble too, and we expected a hard fight, but this was a cruel blow. We walked back to the tube station, staring relegation squarely in the face. Our games in hand were running out. We needed to start winning, and we needed to start winning soon, like Saturday. Saturday saw the rearranged game with Southampton. We desperately needed to win, and therefore allowed Southampton to score straight from the kick-off. After all, this is West Ham. We don't want to make things easy for ourselves, do we? Brady equalised from the penalty spot, but Paul Rideout scored a second for Southampton, and it was all over. From a potential 9 points, we'd taken 1. We turned on the radio in Staintooth's car to find out what had been going on in the Cup semi-finals. There'd been trouble at Hillsborough in the match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. Those bloody Liverpool fans been fighting again, I asked Staintooth. I prayed that Christina hadn't gone, and if she had, she was safe. The news came through that people had died. They were using the advertising hoardings as stretchers, to get people out of trouble, but in many cases it was too late. From what we could gather, a number of late arrivals at the Liverpool end had been allowed immediate access as the game was about to kick off. In their rush to get on the terrace, they crushed and killed 96 Liverpool fans. People were crushed against the crash barriers, against the fencing at the front, or just suffocated under the weight of bodies front and rear. I watched it on TV that night, and once again I'm not ashamed to say I cried out loud. As a direct result of that incident, and no other, we now have all-seater stadia in the Premier League. Some say that's a good thing, others don't. Whether it was worth the sacrifice of 96 lives to bring it about, we can only speculate. Everton beat Norwich 1-0 in the other semi-final, the hollowest victory in the history of the game. Chapter 47. Revenge. West Ham United 1, Luton Town 0, 6th of May 1989. We should have been finished, but somehow we still had a chance of survival. The fact that Newcastle and Middlesbrough were even worse than us helped, plus the fact that we'd taken 4 points from Villa, who teetered on the brink of the relegation zone. If we were going to stay up, Villa were the realistic target that we had to overhaul. The call to arms began with a totally out-of-character 3-0 win over Millwall. All 3 goals came in the first half. We blew them aside like a team of cardboard cutouts. Julian Dix scored the first of his many long-range goals, Dickens and Paris getting the others. The next game was against already relegated Newcastle at St James's Park. Again, we gave them a goal start, but a miracle happened and we turned it around through Kevin Keane and Mark Ward. Maybe there was a chance after all. I brought myself back to reality when I saw who the next game was against, Luton Town. Our last home game of the season, and one we had to win to stand any chance of staying up. I just couldn't see Luton handing us victory after all we'd been through together. I left Karen at my house while I went off with Staintooth in his now much less embarrassing Vauxhall Cavalier. As the last game of the season, we treated ourselves to seats in the lower tier of the West Stand and prepared to watch the team's escape bid undone by our Bedfordshire friends. Staintooth had to pinch me as I saw Alan Dickens dance through the defence and slot the winning goal into the net. We'd done it. Not only had we won 3 league games in a row, but we'd beaten Luton. Now anything was possible. Revenge was sweet, even if it was only 1-0, and the aggregate score against Luton that season made sad reading. West Ham 2, Luton Town 9. The impossible continued at a spooky Hillsborough, as West Ham scored twice at the tarpaulin-covered Leppings Lane end to secure a 2-0 win. 4 wins on the trot, and looking good for survival. Only 1, or rather 3 problems. There were 3 away games left. Of the 3 teams we would have chosen to play, they would definitely not have been cup finalists Everton, shit-hot Nottingham Forest, and title-chasing Liverpool. But that's how it worked out. We had to win 2 out of 3 to be in with a chance of survival. Stuart Slater put us 1-0 up, but for the second time in 3 years we played Everton away the week before a cup final, and they were trying to claim their places in the team and pulled out all the party pieces. There was still a glimmer of hope. At 2-1 down we won a penalty. Without Ray Stewart's cool head, the responsibility went to young Kevin Keane, who hit the ball straight at Neville Southall. Everton scored again, and it was looking highly dodgy. 2 days later, suddenly and without warning, we won at Nottingham Forest. What the hell was going on? Leroy scored after 25 seconds. That just wasn't right. The opposition was supposed to score straight from the kick-off, not us. Leroy got a second, and Lee Chapman pulled one back for Forest, but we held on to defer the decision to the last game. The arithmetic was blindingly simple. If we won at Anfield in our final game, we would stay up. Aston Villa would go down, with the already relegated Middlesbrough and Newcastle. I listened to the game on the radio. Liverpool needed 3 points for their title race against Arsenal. They also needed goals, Arsenal having a much superior goal difference to them. And they still had to visit Anfield after us to decide the championship. The odds were heavily stacked against us, particularly when Liverpool scored. That horrible feeling crept up on me, the the feeling that all the blood is sinking to your feet and your heart is pounding so heavily it almost bursts through your chest. Then Leroy equalised and there was hope again. In the second half, Alan McKnight, playing his last league match for West Ham, conceded 4. He couldn't have been blamed for any of them. Liverpool were buzzing, and our reserves were drained to the very last drop. Paul Ince was nobbled by Steve McMahon, and with him went our chances of preserving First Division status. It was a significant evening, not just for West Ham but for English football generally. Our demise meant that Aston Villa stayed up by the skin of their teeth, and the following season they finished second, earning Graham Taylor the England job. Had Villa gone down, the FA might have employed someone with a decent footballing brain. Also, the fact we lost 5-1 meant that Arsenal had to win by 2 goals when they visited Anfield a few days later. It was the one and only time I'd ever wanted Arsenal to win. Everyone was saying that Liverpool deserved the double for their fans after the Hillsborough tragedy, but that was rubbish. They would have deserved it if they'd won enough games. They hadn't. When Arsenal went 1-0 up, Liverpool sat back, content, it seemed, for a narrow defeat and the championship on goal difference. Poetic justice arrived in the last minute when Michael Thomas scored a second and Liverpool had no time to reply. Liverpool had only themselves to blame. We faced a season in the second division. I say season because I didn't meet anyone who thought we'd be down there very long. John Lyall knew all about getting out of the second division, and as long as we held on to the players we had, and maybe even added a few more, there was no reason why we shouldn't bounce straight back. In the meantime, both Karen and I had to find jobs for our year out from college. Karen had moved in with her half-brother Nick and his French girlfriend in their big townhouse in Nunhead. This was only slightly less inconvenient than the house she'd previously lodged in Kennington. I got a job with a West End company of chartered surveyors called Farrestead and Glynn, who were based in Sackville Street. In 1989, the commercial property market was still buoyant, and I had 3 other companies who wanted me to work for them. Such luxury! Of the other 2 who wanted me, one was based in Reigate, which was a bit out of the way. The other was the Metropolitan Police Estates Division. I couldn't bring myself to work for the police, although on reflection, it might have been a good move. I could well have my own apron by now. Karen took a job with a national firm of surveyors placed just around the corner from my place of work. I did a very stupid thing. I asked her to marry me. She did a very stupid thing. She said yes. Chapter 48. Devil Woman. West Ham United 3, Plymouth Argyle 2. 26th of August, 1989. At last, the West Ham board showed a bit of initiative. While John Lyall was busy preparing for the new season in the second division by polishing his fishing reels, the West Ham board sacked him. It was a difficult piece of news for everyone to believe. After all, John Lyall had been at the club for more than just a few years. John Lyall was West Ham United. The account of his dismissal in his book, Just Like My Dreams, is very moving, and one has sympathy for him in the way it was handled. But then, when you've got to go... What was even more difficult to understand was the choice of successor. Lou Macari had been successful in guiding Swindon Town out of the 4th Division and then the 3rd, and had made them a very successful 2nd Division side. That was hardly a qualification, in my book, to make him the manager of West Ham United. Swindon were notorious for using the long ball, and we all groaned when we realised the prospect of long ball tactics at the academy. The board were quick to make the point that Macari had only used such tactics at Swindon because of the quality of players available to him. If he'd had players who could play the ball on the floor, he would have done. I was still to be convinced. Paul Ince was turning into a prize twat. He'd been photographed wearing a Manchester United shirt and had made it clear that he wanted to leave the club. It just so happened that Manchester United were interested. What a coincidence. This incident angered us all so much that it rankles with us to this day, perhaps now even more so than it did at the time. Seeing all the success he's had has made us very jealous. I'm happy to admit that I hate the jumped-up little shit, who ought to remember from time to time who gave him his success in the first place and show a little respect. Lesson over. It seemed that Macari knew how to handle him anyway. He played in Alan Devonshire's testimonial game at Upton Park, a 3-1 win over Crystal Palace, and then in the opening game of the 89-90 season at Stoke City. Kevin Keane scored in a 1-1 draw. That was Ince's last appearance in a West Ham shirt. Macari stated he only wanted players to play for West Ham who really wanted to. In fact, players who would die for West Ham. This later turned out not to be true, as he repeatedly played Mark Ward despite the fact that he was desperate to get away. Still, at the time it made a refreshing change to John Lyle's wait-and-see attitude. It still seemed that at last we had a manager with balls, someone who'd crawl over broken glass with his flies undone for the cause, someone who would get results, first time. Karen wanted results too. My new fiancée was unimpressed with the fact that I occasionally felt the desire to go home. I couldn't understand why she didn't want to go home more often, but then I'd not experienced her family background. Whenever I was there, her stepfather was a perfect gentleman, and her mother made such a fuss it was untrue. I began to wonder if Karen had been lying to me, but the more I thought about it, the more I could see how the problems might have arisen. I managed to persuade her to come home with me on August the 23rd, instead of going to see West Ham play Bradford City at Upton Park. I felt very bitter about this, as I was missing our first home match under Lou Macari, just so I could do something I ought to have been able to do any time I wanted. Still, I was in love. The following Saturday, I'd been allowed to borrow Staintooth's East Terrace season ticket, and fully intended to see the game against Plymouth Argyle. You see, the thing about Karen is, it was all or nothing. When she was in a good mood, you were made to feel like $1 million, and she'd play out any fantasy you might have in order to please you. On one occasion, I remember her cooking me a superb dinner, then disappearing upstairs for a while, returning dressed in her old-school uniform, including hockey skirts, stockings and suspenders, and demanding that I make love to her there and then on the kitchen table. On another occasion, she came to meet me in the office on a Sunday afternoon. I was alone in the office, and gave her a guided tour, showing her the computer room and the downstairs kitchen area. She insisted on giving me the most amazing blowjob while the office door was wide open and anyone could have walked in. That was the kind of girl she was, impulsive and with a four-wheel sex drive. On the downside, when she was angry, she could outsulk anyone and make you feel like a rapist, child molester and murderer all rolled into one. It didn't need to be anything major to flick the mental switch either. Just putting a beer can in the wrong bin could spell disaster. But I loved her. That Saturday morning I was in trouble. I'd asked her why she never told me when she had an orgasm, and she said it was because I was never in the room at the time. Not only that, but I'd committed the cardinal sin of sticking up for one of her female friends, who she was doing a character assassination on, something she enjoyed doing very much. My defending of the poor girl obviously meant that I was either having an affair with her, or had done in the past, or I fancied her something rotten. None of this was true. I just liked to see justice done. I'd had enough. I walked out of the door, went to collect Staintooth's season ticket, losing myself in West Ham for the afternoon, and not caring what Karen was getting up to. The game was superb. West Ham were playing well, and Lou Macari's first signing, Martin Allen, looked a good prospect. The move down a division was bringing out the best in David Kelly. He looked twice the player in the second division than he did in the first. He had a goal disallowed before putting us into the lead. It was a very wet and warm day, and the rain was driving hard into our faces on the East Terrace, but we didn't care. Shortly after the start of the second half, Martin Allen scored. Plymouth pulled one back before Kelly had another one disallowed, then Mark Ward set up Kevin Keane for the third. Although Plymouth pulled another one back, it was never going to be enough. Perhaps this second division lark wouldn't be so bad after all, I thought to myself as I left the ground. At least we'll be winning more often than we lose. I didn't much care about the fact that we wouldn't be playing the likes of Liverpool, Manchester United and Tottenham. At that time, I would rather see us beat Oldham Athletic than lose to Liverpool. And there were always the cup nights to look forward to seeing the big teams again. Perhaps the only reason that I thought this was that the crowd hadn't been affected by the drop in status. Indeed, the average crowd had risen slightly on previous season. Obviously, income from TV and sponsorship was going to be affected, but I saw no reason why a spell in the second division shouldn't be a good thing. I tentatively let myself back into the house and called out to see if Karen was in. As I walked into the bedroom, she was waiting for me in bed, wearing a brand new item of sexy lingerie she'd been out and bought that afternoon. "Well," she said, "what do you think?" I took off my soaking jacket and took a good look at the tempting silky underwear. "You want my honest opinion?" I asked. "Of course," she nodded. I think Kelly should have had a hat-trick. Chapter 49. That's What I Like. West Ham United 5, Sunderland 0, 18th of October 1989. I could see that once again it was going to prove difficult to get along to matches. For the first few months of the season, the only opportunities arose when Karen and I had a row, and I had to make myself scarce. Fortunately, after the Plymouth game, it all ended in a lot of kissing and making up, but it was getting to the stage where I could see my future as a regular on the terrace at West Ham was in serious jeopardy if I went through with marriage. Karen just didn't have a clue about football. She supported Manchester United. We were both working full-time and only had weekends to spend together. Although we'd not planned to get married until 1992, it seemed that every weekend was filled with preparation, shopping for this, looking through catalogues, selecting rings, etc. After all, you can't be too careful, can you? While West Ham were drawing 1-1 at Hull City, I had my head forcibly wedged in a jewellery catalogue selecting an engagement ring. "I like emeralds," she said. "I bet you bloody do. Have you seen how much they cost?" "What was that? Mark Ward scored?" "Yes!" "And diamonds. How about this one?" "Come on, lads. Hold on till half-time." "Yes, very nice, love." "What about this? This looks nice. What is it?" "Cubic zirconia." "Sounds nice." Not impressed. As I was only a student and working for a year, I made the token gesture of spending £75 on an engagement ring made of emeralds and diamonds that were so small you needed an electron microscope and a sunny day to see them. I fully intended to buy a more realistic one once we were both working full-time, but this was enough of a symbol, we both agreed, for the time being. I missed the draw with Swindon because we were out doing something really pathetic like looking at bridesmaids' dresses. If I dared to say, "Look, the wedding's 2 years away, can't we do this in the summer?" I'd get a hard stare later that evening and be forced to sleep on the damp patch with no covers. Eventually, Karen relented and realised that it was futile to make plans so far in advance, as most retailers weren't interested. Just when I thought I was saved, up popped her best friend, Anne-Marie, who announced she was getting married in July, and asked Karen to be her chief bridesmaid and me to be an usher. Naturally, this meant more weekends spent trailing round Elm Park and Basildon, getting measured up for morning suits, top hats and ridiculous-looking cravats. We lost our first game of the season away at Brighton. A couple of days before, spoilt brat Ince got his own way and had become a Manchester United player. And we wished him all the best. Oh yes, we did. Liam Brady missed a penalty and we went down 3-0. I think I listened to that one while travelling backwards and forwards to Nunhead, shifting some of Karen's possessions in order that her former boyfriend wouldn't lay claim to them. I'm sure he had no intention of asking her for them, but it was a good way of keeping me under control. I lost my temper the morning of the Littlewoods Cup victory at Birmingham. Martin Allen and Stuart Slater had scored in a 2-1 win and Julian Dix had been promoted to captain. I was in a good mood as we prepared to trail off to work from her Nunhead digs, when I spotted a pair of underpants in her top drawer that I didn't recognise. "These yours?" I innocently asked. "Do they look like mine?" she replied romantically. "No, but they're not mine." "Well, they must be." I could see the cogs turning over in her mind. "What are you suggesting?" she screamed. "Nothing, I just wondered whose they were, that's all." That was it. Enough to draw a stony silence for the next 4 days. I had a word with her brother. They turned out to be his. He'd put them in the wrong laundry pile. Sorted. But I had offended her by implying she was having an affair with a man who wore unusual underpants. The stony silence continued as we drove over to Anne-Marie's house in Elm Park. I explained to Phil, her fiancé, a really nice bloke and a copper, so that proves it's not true what they say. He suggested that he and I, together with his mate Barry, go to Upton Park to watch the Watford game, while the girls had a good bitch. Excellent idea. Once again, and not for the last time, a West Ham victory helped me to escape. Julian Dix scoring from the spot in a 1-0 win. Colin Foster made his debut in that game. I was amazed. Here we were, a second division team, and so far Macari had brought in 2 players, Martin Allen and Colin Foster, both from first division sides, QPR and Nottingham Forest respectively. They obviously thought West Ham were going places, even if we didn't. When we got home, there was still an atmosphere you could cut with a truncheon. Phil and Anne-Marie made themselves scarce, and Karen spoke to me for the first time in days. She apologised for getting the hump, but that didn't mean I was forgiven. I would have to tread very carefully. Yes, Mum. The next Tuesday, I was dragged screaming and shouting to go 10-pin bowling, when all I wanted to do was relax in front of the radio and listen to our 1-0 win at Portsmouth. I had to settle for a quick call to Club Call for the good news. Then followed 3 home matches, of which I saw exactly none. I didn't see us lose 3-2 to West Brom, because we had an appointment to see a mortgage advisor about the possibility of buying a flat. Quite why Karen couldn't have arranged the appointment for the morning, I don't know. Oh, wait a minute, yes I do. Eamon Dolan scored his first competitive goal for West Ham in that match. I missed the 1-1 draw with Birmingham in the second leg of the Littlewoods Cup because I had to work late at the office and didn't get away in time. Finally, I missed the 1-0 defeat at home to Leeds because I was moving Karen out of Nunhead and into my house with my parents. Karen's brother had split up with his French girlfriend. He'd caught her having it off with a Norwegian called Norman and walked out. Not being a materialistic sort of bloke, i.e. mad, he let her stay at the house and found himself a small hole to live in on the other side of the river. It was called Edmonton. This left Karen in an awkward position. She'd been told she was welcome to stay at the house, but was made to feel very uncomfortable. Extra lodgers arrived, and life became rather hectic. In stepped Muggins, the knight in shining armour. I spent the whole day trundling backwards and forwards in my little escort, urging the scoreline to change at Upton Park. Surely we wouldn't lose to a goal scored by Vinnie Jones. Surely. We did. At least we had a decent kit that season, as scoreline had finally seen sense and switched their attention to really crap teams like Blackpool and Barnsley. West Ham had a deal with Buckter, who had supplied their kit in the days before Admiral. This was a much more traditional kit, a claret body with blue sleeves, no mucking about. New sponsors too. Avco finally got pissed off with being associated with losers all the time, and we were now sponsored by BAC Windows, who, like Avco, no one had heard of. It wasn't looking good for the trip to Bramall Lane to play Sheffield United. They were in second place and unbeaten, while West Ham struggled along inconsistently in 7th place. I had other things on my mind that Saturday. I was desperate to ensure we didn't have to stay under the same roof as my parents for longer than was absolutely necessary. This wasn't because I didn't like my parents, but because Karen was so volatile, she was like a time bomb waiting to go off. I was out looking for a flat to rent. As luck would have it, I'd been talking to my former colleague, Sue Miller, who had a flat in Beckenham which had just become vacant. She agreed to let me and Karen rent it for 6 months if we both liked it. We took a look and both fell in love with it. It was huge, a split-level masonette with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom upstairs, and a big lounge and a kitchen downstairs. We struck a deal and agreed to take possession on November the 4th. The day was complete when I heard we'd won 2-0 at Sheffield United. Some days are good. Very, very good. Tim, my friend from college, was experiencing similar trouble to myself. He'd been unable to get to a game all season and was pining for the North Bank. However, his girlfriend wouldn't let him out of her sight. We discussed the matter over lunch and decided it was time we put our collective feet down, as it were, and told them that we were going to watch West Ham play Sunderland whether they liked it or not. To our dismay, they readily agreed. It was another one of those Upton Park nights when everything went right. Martin Allen hit a goal from about 20 yards. Stuart Slater scored a brilliant goal. Parks hit a long clearance which Dolan headed on. Slater controlled the ball on his chest and slammed the ball into the back of the net. It hadn't touched the ground. Kevin Keane scored another from an impossible angle, virtually on the touchline, and Sunderland, who were 3 places above us in the league, were blown away in the first half. Dolan added 2 more in the second half, followed by his now fabled Irish jig and Douglas Bader celebrations. Dolan was often compared to Douglas Bader, not very mobile on the ground but brilliant in the air. We'd had a few jars before the game, and I was still a bit tipsy when I rolled in at 11 o'clock, expecting a right rollicking, but I was welcomed into bed and made a total fuss of. The bed sheets bobbed for a few hours, and I began to feel that life was worth living. Karen wasn't such a bad stick after all. Chapter 50. Where the Heart Is. West Ham United 0, Newcastle United 0, 11th of November 1989. Life could not have been much better. Following the 5-0 tanking of Sunderland, Karen and I went away for a mucky weekend in Hastings, the only downer being the fact that West Ham had twice thrown away a lead to draw 2-2 at Port Vale. I had the flat sorted out, and Saturdays were now spent buying things for the flat rather than for the wedding. It was a cross I was reasonably happy to bear, because it stopped Karen having a go at me. At last I'd done something right in her books. In the week, West Ham got a highly creditable 0-0 draw at Aston Villa in the third round of the Littlewoods Cup. Villa were buzzing at the time and were about to go on to finish second. Only a couple of weeks later, they beat Everton 6-2 on live TV, David Platt scoring 4 and earning himself a regular spot in the England team. On Saturday, while trailing around Alder's department store, the lads were beating Oxford United 3-2, and during the first few days of November we drew 1-1 at Bournemouth and lost 1-0 at Wolves. The defeat at Wolves was the first in 7 games, a run which had pushed us up into the playoff frame. It seemed that playoffs would be the best bet, as Sheffield United and Leeds United appeared to have the top 2 automatic places sorted for themselves. The game against Wolves also heralded the moving into the flat at Littlestone Close. I was excited and nervous too. I was moving away from home for the first time. Naturally, Karen didn't understand, as she'd been living away from home since the age of 17, but then I didn't expect her to understand. My brother-in-law, a serious bodybuilder, helped us to lug all our worldly goods up the 6 flights of stairs, and I made several trips backwards and forwards in the van I'd hired for the weekend. We were due up in Wrexham the following weekend, so I arranged for both Karen and myself to have tickets for the replay against Aston Villa to make up for the fact that I would have to miss the home game with Newcastle. That way, I reckon, there would be no objection. As long as she felt she was the centre of attention, I could take her anywhere, even to football. In fact, she quite enjoyed coming along to football and embarrassing me in front of my mates, telling them all what we got up to when the curtains were drawn. In many ways, it gave me a bit of a kick too, but I never did work out exactly why she felt she had to do it. She was developing a big crush on Julian Dix. I couldn't work out whether she was doing it to wind me up or whether it was real. After all, as far as I was concerned, he looked like a dog's bum with a hat on. But there's no accounting for taste. We watched the game from the lower tier of the West Stand with Staintooth and Close. The object of Karen's desire scored a cracking goal, which was enough to see us through. Karen had developed a worrying tendency to cross-examine me about my own desires and wishes in the female direction. What sort of girl did I like? What particularly attracted me to a woman? Did I ever fantasize about women at work? As I'd always eulogised about Diana and how hard it was to work with her after our affair, I think she thought I had a thing about women in the office. She kept on and on and on at me until I finally admitted there was a really cute little secretary at work called Jackie, who I thought was really horny and needed a good seeing to. I thought this would satisfy her perverse curiosity, but instead I had to endure another 20 questions about Jackie, followed by the now familiar deafening silence. It wouldn't have been so bad, but Karen had arranged to meet me at my office at midday on the Friday so we could drive straight up to Wrexham. When she arrived, Jackie was sitting on my desk with a hand on my shoulder, laughing at one of my jokes and showing a not insurmountable amount of stocking top. There was absolutely nothing in it, but the silence lasted all the way up to Wrexham and all the way through tea with her mother. I wanted to sort it out, but waited until I'd heard the disappointing news from Upton Park that we'd only managed a 0-0 draw with Newcastle. We needed to be beating teams like Newcastle, also in the playoff zone, if we were going to achieve anything. I thrashed out another compromise with She Who Must Be Obeyed. We agreed that Karen wouldn't ask me any more searching questions, and I wouldn't give her leading answers that I knew would wind her up. It worked for about 3 weeks, and when it started again, didn't stop until Jackie had left to become an au pair in Italy. I actually liked Jackie very much. She used to wiggle around the office like she had a wasp in her knickers. If I had my time again, I wouldn't have minded giving Karen something to get really worried about, but hindsight is a wonderful thing. Karen's parents, at least, seemed to like me. Her stepfather had been built up as some huge ogre who I'd have to mind or face problems for the rest of eternity, but he was a pussycat. Once I got him onto the subject of football, he was a delight. He was a real Manchester United supporter who actually came from Manchester. He was pleased that Lou Macari had made it as a manager and hoped that he did well. What a nice guy. Her mother was a strict disciplinarian who wouldn't allow us to so much as kiss under her roof, so I had to sleep on the sofa while Karen had a double bed all to herself. It grates to this day that not once did Karen sneak down in the middle of the night for a bit of forbidden nookie. Perhaps she was thinking exactly the same thing. At least I could have made the excuse I was looking for the bathroom. Meanwhile, back on the pitch, Slater was emerging as a real star. He scored another goal against Middlesbrough, and Julian Dix added a penalty as we won 2-0. The Littlewoods Cup came round again. In the fourth round we beat Wimbledon 1-0 at Upton Park with a Martin Allen volley. Justin Fashion, who joined us on trial and was involved in the build-up to the goal. Shortly afterwards it was revealed that he was gay, and suddenly he really wasn't wanted anymore. Gosh, we football supporters are so prejudiced, aren't we? The match was won with 10 men, Julian Dix having been sent off for the first time as a West Ham player, but certainly not the last. The press concentrated so much on the brawl that preceded the sending off they almost forgot that we'd beaten a First Division side and were now in the quarter-finals with a home draw against First Division opposition, Derby County. On November the 25th, for no apparent reason, the season went pear-shaped. We were playing Blackburn Rovers at Ewood Park. Blackburn had a decent side but were only mid-table and should not have been able to go 4-1 up by half-time. Despite a spirited fight-back, West Ham lost 5-4 and won only one of the next 13 games. From 5th place and a confident of a playoff place, the whole season disintegrated like a sugar cube in a cup of coffee. We beat Plymouth again in the ZDS Cup, another incarnation of the full members stroke Simod Cup, but even that took extra time. 5-2 was a flattering scoreline by all accounts. A winter of discontent beckoned. Chapter 51. Fade to Grey. Torquay United 1, West Ham United 0. 6th of January 1990. After a promising start, things rapidly ran downhill. It was rather like my relationship with Karen. After beating Plymouth in the Cup, we could only manage a 0-0 draw at home to relegation fodder Stoke City. We then managed to lose away at Bradford 2-1 and at home to Oldham Athletic. The game against Oldham was one of those games where we appeared to be a team of boys playing against giants. Every time the ball was played into the Oldham half, it came back with interest. Oldham dominated from start to finish and scored through Milligan and a Foster own goal. Tim and I watched on, unimpressed, from a sparsely populated West Stand. A few days later, we threw away another promising situation after leading 3-2 at Chelsea in the ZDS Cup. They scored 2 late goals to go through 4-3. Their team included our former midfield dynamo Alan Dickens, who'd run off when the prospect of second division football beckoned. How much good did it do him? He was last spotted playing for non-league Brentford. So much for career advancement. Macari's reluctance to play Alan McKnight resulted in him bringing in Perry Suckling on loan from Crystal Palace. Suckling was like McKnight in many ways. He was similar in appearance and, as we feared, in capability. The man who once had picked the ball out of the net 9 times at Anfield was at it again against Oldham. After a Christmas which was spent quietly at home with family and Karen, we lost to Ipswich on Boxing Day. Almost unheard of. Losing to Ipswich. Things were bad. 4 days later, we lost again at Filbert Street to a Leicester City side that included Gary McAllister. It was no disgrace to lose to a cracking goal from Ali Mocklin. The team showed 2 new faces. Mark Ward had his wish granted and moved back up north to Manchester City. In a straight swap deal, we gained Trevor Morley and Ian Bishop. Both played against Leicester, but showed no hint of the good form that would follow. The next day, a further signing, Jimmy Quinn from Bradford City. The arrival of Quinn was excellent news in my view. I'd seen him play for a lot of teams, including Swindon, Bradford and Blackburn Rovers, and he always got goals. He was a Northern Ireland international, but I didn't read too much into that. After all, so was Alan McKnight. On New Year's Day, I was granted leave from the premarital nest to watch the game against Barnsley. All three new boys played in an unrecognisable lineup. The goal scorers were familiar, however. Martin Allen got the first, Kevin Keane added 2, and Julian Dix a penalty. What was also very familiar was the way we gave away 2 late goals as we took our foot off the accelerator towards the end. 4-2 was a decent scoreline though, and went some way towards paying Barnsley back for the Littlewoods Cup defeat in '87. There then followed a completely inexplicable result. We lost in the third round of the FA Cup at Torquay. I mean, Torquay. Hardly a hotbed of football, is it? It's not as though they were sleeping giants from the past like Bolton or Preston. Torquay. As far as I was concerned, they had nothing but a nice beach. I was driving Karen home from Anne Marie's when I heard the news. I was grateful for 2 things. Firstly, that we were not a First Division side, and therefore didn't attract the banner back page headlines. Also for the fact that I hadn't gone. I'm not sure I could have dealt with that. It was this period of instability that contributed to our failure to win promotion. As we stuttered, Leeds, Sheffield United, Newcastle, Swindon, Sunderland and Blackburn all put together steady little runs that put them in the frame. We could only look up and watch. At least we managed a point in the next game, another trip to Devon to play Plymouth Argyle. The game ended 1-1 and Jimmy Quinn scored his first goal for West Ham. The good news was that Quinn, Bishop and Morley all looked like useful players. The bad news was they were all cup-tied and couldn't take part in our Littlewoods Cup campaign. Derby County arrived at Upton Park amid accusations that Lou Macari was something less than whiter than white. It had been alleged by several newspapers that in his Swindon days he'd bet on Swindon losing a cup tie at Newcastle to cover expenses for the trip. Swindon duly lost, and Macari collected an undisclosed figure. There were other irregularities surrounding his time at Swindon which defied explanation. He was a man under pressure. Julian Dix relieved some of the pressure with a spectacular goal, beating Peter Shilton from about 25 yards out. Tony Gale had a nightmare though, and under-hit a back pass, which Dean Saunders latched onto and slid past Phil Parks. A replay at the baseball ground was not the result anyone, except perhaps Derby fans, really wanted. To add insult to injury, Macari changed the team for the visit of Hull City, bringing back the cup-tied players, only for City to win 2-1. Trevor Morley scored his first for West Ham, netting Staintooth a return of £10, but even so, things were looking bad, even by our own poor standards. The replay at the baseball ground finished in a goalless draw, even after extra time. Kelly had put the ball in the net, but it was ruled out for offside. The second replay took place a week later at Upton Park. Slater and Keane scored to put us into the semi-final for the second season running. Surely we wouldn't throw it away 2 seasons running, would we? The draw was made and we were paired with Oldham, the team who had made us look fifth-rate before Christmas and who had a plastic pitch that made Luton's look like a ploughed field. The groundsman used to come out at half-time and polish it. This was a severe blow. At least the away leg came first, so if we could keep the score down, we stood a chance at home under the lights. One more triumph for Macari, a 3-1 win over Brighton at Upton Park. Cup-tied Jimmy Quinn scoring twice and Julian Dix the other. Macari was now under intense pressure, with rumours surrounding his activity at Swindon. The first leg of the semi-final against Oldham turned out to be his last game in charge. It was played on a cold and wet St Valentine's night, and Karen wasn't impressed at that fact, as we stood in the open terrace and proceeded to get drenched and frozen while Oldham banged in 6 goals. It's easy to look for excuses, plastic pitch, injuries, unsettling position of manager, etc. After all is said and done though, the 11 players that took the pitch were all professionals who had a job to do. To lose by 6 goals is unforgivable, and merely gave Oldham commercial department an extra fortnight to prepare their Wembley memorabilia. As we drove home down a wet and windy M6 motorway, we were passed by a lunatic in a black XR3i. 3 miles on, we passed him, a dead lunatic. Possibly, we thought, a deliberate attempt to end it all by a disenchanted West Ham supporter. The scoreline was enough to finally push Macari over the edge, and he resigned a few days later. The club were left managerless, floating in mid-table obscurity and as good as out of the Littlewoods Cup. Chapter 52. Billy, Don't Be a Hero. Sunderland 4, West Ham United 3, 24th of March 1990. Stranded in 12th place, West Ham travelled to Swindon and came away with a 2-2 draw. For some reason the game was played on a Sunday, but I can't remember why I didn't go. I can have a good stab at a guess though. The game was significant in that we finally found a decent goalkeeper to replace the ageing Parks. Macari's parting gift to West Ham was a towering Czech international goalkeeper, Ludek Miklosko. He was the last player Macari signed from Baník Ostrava for what now seems like a bargain £300,000. Ronnie Boyce took charge of the first team while the board considered the task of appointing Macari's successor. The press put out some strange names into the frame, but we all knew who we wanted. Billy Bonds was appointed successor to Lou Macari on February the 23rd. I learned the news from an Evening Standard news vendor on Shaftesbury Avenue, the only time I've ever bought a newspaper on the strength of a headline. Billy Bonds takes over, read the main headline. West Ham turned to the old guard, ran the sub-headline. I was delighted. Bonds had been a fine leader as captain. I saw no reason why he shouldn't do the same as manager. He had only achieved mediocre results in his spell as youth team manager, but it seemed to every supporter that Bonds was the man we needed to lift morale for a final assault on the playoffs. His first match in charge was against fellow playoff contenders Blackburn Rovers at Upton Park. West Ham played with an attitude and a commitment seldom seen before or since, but inexplicably only had one goal to show for it at half-time. The post and crossbar had both been bruised, and the Blackburn goalkeeper must have thought he was in for a Jane Fonda-type workout. Jimmy Quinn scored a brilliantly executed header, but we could well have been 5 or 6 goals up by half-time, a reverse of the game at Yewood Park. We paid for the missed chances. Bonds learned his first hard lesson as a manager. Blackburn equalised, and the day ended as a bit of an anticlimax. However, we came away from the game knowing that if we displayed the same passion and commitment for the rest of the season, we had a good chance of the playoff place, and a good chance of reaching respectability in the second leg of the Cup semi-final against Oldham. Bonds got his first victory as manager at Middlesbrough the next Saturday, a 1-0 win, Martin Allen scoring the winner. The following Wednesday, we had the chance to get back at Oldham. No one had any doubt that we'd win, but whether we could win by the 7-goal margin was another matter. The bookmakers were quoting odds of 80-1 for a 7-0 victory. I took a piece of that action, knowing that Oldham would probably sit back on their 6-goal lead. If we played like we did against Blackburn, we had a chance. Unfortunately, we were without our cup-tied trio, so the team was different, but we were still 3 up inside an hour. When Julian Dix hit the crossbar with a rasping drive, there was an audible intake of breath from the away supporters section. Apparently it came to light after the game that the commercial manager at Oldham was shitting himself at that point, as he had already spent a vast amount of money on Wembley hats, scarves, flags and other rip-off-the-fans-and-get-rich-quick memorabilia. Had the 4th one gone in, we would have been within spitting distance of taking the game to extra time. The lads put up a tremendous show. Alvin Martin, Julian Dix and David Kelly scored the goals in a match which ended 3-0, 6-3 on aggregate. Despite conceding 6, we'd managed to avoid losing by a heavier margin than the previous season against Luton. I haven't mentioned Luton for a little while, have I? You'll remember Luton, that little Bedfordshire club who I hate more than anything else in the world, even more than lumpy custard. Karen was beginning to annoy me intensely. She'd been a constant thorn in my side while I was trying to win her affection. Now that I had it, she was pushing the thorn like a barbed hook. She was now as regular a fixture on the North Bank as I was, which was a source of constant amusement to my friends and an embarrassment to me. When Portsmouth came to Upton Park, I had good cause to thank the Lord for Jimmy Quinn, a man who will always be a hero of mine. No sooner had we taken our regular spot behind the goal, but slightly above and to the left, Quinn began his usual warm-up routine with Miklosko. Occasionally a wayward ball would find its way into the crowd. Karen was giving me some severe grief about something. I can't remember what. But Quinn let fly from about 12 yards and the ball hit her squarely on the jaw, the smile falling from her face so fast you could almost hear it hit the floor. I caught her before she collapsed in a heap on the terrace, but was shaking with suppressed laughter as the St John's ambulance man gave me a hand to get her to the first aid room. She recovered in time to watch the game, insisting that she was all right and didn't want to go home, but she was blissfully quiet for the rest of the afternoon. Later, she demanded that I defend her honour by writing to Quinn and demanding an apology. I sent him a letter, but it didn't demand an apology. It thanked him, most sincerely, for shutting her up for the afternoon. He wrote back and apologised anyway and sent a signed photograph. Nice guy. The game against Portsmouth ended with a 2-1 win, Martin Allen and Julian Dix scoring. Another win away at Watford meant West Ham were in with a chance of the playoffs again, particularly as we still had to play the main competitors Leeds, Sheffield United, Newcastle, Sunderland and Oldham. Problem was, all but one of those games were away from home. The next game was the away fixture at Elland Road. Confident but without key player Julian Dix through suspension, West Ham put up a brave show until the latter stages of the first half, when Lee Chapman scored twice. The match was beamed back to Upton Park on big screen TV. It was called big screen TV anyway. It was actually a bank of TV sets about 5x5, which built up to present the full picture. The quality of the picture was awful, as was the quality of the performance. No sooner did Trevor Morley pull one back than Leeds raced up the other end and went 3-1 up. Most people left at that point, but I'd learnt my lesson the hard way and was rewarded with a goal for West Ham which was initially credited to Colin Foster, but later analysis showed it was an own goal. A 3-2 defeat wasn't too bad against the league leaders, and second place Sheffield United made the trip to Upton Park 4 days later. If we could edge a result against them, we were in with a chance. Ludek Miklosko, or Ludo as he immediately became known, was proving to be one of our most influential attackers as well as a world-class goalkeeper. He could launch long punts upfield for Morley and Quinn to feed off. It was ironic that this tactic should come into play after the departure of Macari. It was something we would have expected from him, not from Bonds. It was used to full effect against Sheffield United as Morley collected a long clearance to put us 1-0 up. In the second half, United sat back and invited us onto them. West Ham accepted the invitation and scored 4 more goals, Quinn getting a hat-trick and Martin Allen the other. If we could beat the second-place team 5-0, surely we had a chance. Think again. Sunderland were our nearest rivals in the promotion race, and a result at Roker Park was crucial. We took the lead twice, only to lose 4-3. There were many parts of the season which could be highlighted as being costly in terms of a playoff place. Certainly failing to win a game in December was one, but losing to the team that eventually pipped us by 2 points must be regarded as significant. A draw would have been sufficient. At least the strike force continued to flourish. Quinn bagged another 2 and Morley the other in the defeat. We were now in 10th place, 7 points off the last playoff spot. We only had 1 game in hand over Swindon, having played the same number as all our other rivals. Taking that fact into account, it's a miracle we came as close as we did. It was around this time that I met Stuart the QPR fan. Stuart the QPR fan loves QPR as much as I love West Ham, but he doesn't give anyone a hard time about it. Nowadays, it would be fair to say he goes to more games than I do, home and away. He has a season ticket at Loftus Road and has done for as long as he's been able to sit upright, encouraged obviously by his father. What I liked about Stuart the QPR fan when I first met him was that he could talk about football in general terms and not just about QPR or West Ham. He has a general love of the game and doesn't think the football world starts and finishes in Shepherd's Bush. For that reason, I enjoy watching football with Stuart the QPR fan, especially at Loftus Road. It's great every now and then to sit as a neutral in amongst totally committed and partisan fans just to hear the ridiculous comments that are made. They'll claim that black is white if they think it'll earn their team an advantage, when anyone with half a brain can see it was a goal kick, not a corner. It makes you realise that you do exactly the same thing every week, and it scares you just a little bit. I bumped into Stuart and his fiancée Vicky at a party. People often meet members of the opposite sex at parties, but I met a firm male buddy in Stuart the QPR fan at this one. We've remained good friends, despite West Ham and QPR being in the same division and playing each other subsequently, and despite him getting married and moving away from the locality. As he left the party, he wished us good luck for the game against Port Vale. It was another one of those occasions where we could have done with just a bit more luck.